Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Writer's Bridge. If you are our guest for today, please unmute yourself and identify yourself because we sure are hoping that you're here, but you don't have the name Elliott Kalan on your Zoom. So if you are Elliott Kalan, please do unmute and identify yourself because that's what writing comedy is all about. Rolling with the punches at the last minute when your guest is apparently not here.
I am not Elliott Kalan, but I'm Jean Bracken.
Hi, Jean. Nice to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. We are so glad you're here.
You want to be our guest?
So welcome, everybody. We always have a little bit of housekeeping that we do at the beginning of our meeting. So we are going to go ahead and dive into that. And then we will figure out, hopefully Elliot will turn up super soon. So welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here for the Writer's Bridge. We're here today to talk about writing comedy. And I want to remind you guys that one of the funniest things that can possibly happen is somebody being publicly left out to dry. It is entertaining every single time. Hey, Sharla, what's coming up with Craft Talks webinars?
Yeah, great. Tomorrow we have How to Learn to Write and Revise the Hermit Crab Essay with Brenda Miller, who literally coined the term. We'll experiment, we'll surprise ourselves, and we'll have fun generating new, unexpected work. Brenda will also show us how to find our own forms and how those forms can coax out material that might otherwise stay hidden, which is really what's cool about writing with constraint. It's 15, and then we have some upcoming early bird at $15 webinars. That was like the most convoluted way to say that sentence. And upcoming webinars at the early bird price of $15 include Navigating Literary Magazines, Great Markets for Your Work with Becky Took, and Writing with Your Ghosts, Turning Hauntings into Portals with Lorraine Herring. You can learn about and register for those events following the link I'm going to pop into the chat. And Allison, what's coming up for you?
Well, I am so excited. Our Writer's Bridge guest from last month, Shanetta McDonald, who is a professional PR expert, she and I are co-teaching a class from writer to expert, all about building who you are as a brand and as an author and as an expert. I also want to let you guys know I am offering 2 new free email courses about prepping your book for next year. There is a memoir version and there's a novel version. I will drop those links in the chat. They last 6 weeks, starting November 1st. The memoir version is called Permission to Write. It's a free 6-week email series on writing the memoir that matters without apology, without fear, and with a clear plan to get it into readers' hands. The novel version is draft to done in 2026. It is for fiction writers who have outgrown beginner advice and need advanced craft strategy, finishing tactics, and a clear path from manuscript to market. And that also begins November 1st. Both of those courses are free. They are in your inbox, and they're just a way to kind of get situated and get settled and get started for moving into the next year of finishing your book. I want to put out one more call for our guest, Elliott Kalan. Elliott, have you arrived? And if you have, please go ahead and unmute yourself. And everybody else, I would love to ask, would you please put into the chat, what do you want to know about writing comedy, and where are you currently coming from? What do you know about writing comedy, and where are you coming in from? And we are going to go ahead and draft some last minute random guests here for us. We actually have 2 other amazing comedy writers with us at this time. We have Dinty W. Moore and we have Lucy Frost. And I'm going to go ahead and unmute both of those people and pin them and ask them if they can talk to us about some of these comedy question writing things that we have. Hey, Sharla, can you find Lucy Frost and pin her? Now, Lucy is actually our guest for next month when she is going to tell us all about how she went from 0 followers to 100,000 followers in midlife, doing work that she actually enjoyed and loved doing. And many of you also know Dinty W. Moore. And Dinty is the writer and amazing writer of memoir and comedy. And he also is the editor-in-chief of the Brevity Literary Magazine. Dinty, would you introduce yourself and say hello and tell us a little bit about what you think about writing comedy?
Well, I'm on the phone with my agent right now, so I'm trying to decide how much money I'm asking for this appearance. I'll get back to you in just 30,000. 30,000 would be good.
Awesome. We will write that. We will write that check on the Brevity blog account. You know, the Brevity blog is always coining money. So
Yeah. So what was the question,
So
actually?
Dinty, tell us a little bit about your experience writing comedy.
I've never identified directly as a comedy writer. I'm known as an essayist and a memoirist, but comedy is part of everything I write because it's kind of basically the personality I adopted early on to survive the world. So I guess what I would bring to the table, if you were willing to pay me $30,000, is that comedy is not necessarily, comedy is in no way separate from good writing. Not all good writing has to have comedy in it, but a lot of our favorite novelists, a lot of our favorite memoirs, and certainly a lot of our more serious books have moments of lightness and comedy. And there's a reason for that. It's because readers can only take so much seriousness, because comedy breaks down barriers, because once you make your readers smile wryly or laugh out loud, you've invited your reader in a little bit more. So it's a very effective strategy, whether you think of yourself as a comedy writer, a writer who spans serious and lighthearted, or whether you're really writing serious material. But, you know, life is full of comedy, even frankly, tragedy.
I love that. And one of the things I love too, and why sitcoms work so well, is that comedy is tragedy happening to someone else. The way one of my teachers described it in theater school was comedy is tragedy is when I slip on a banana peel and fall on my butt. Comedy is when you fall down a manhole and die. Because comedy is tragedy happening to other people. If we think about sitcoms, sitcoms are funny because what's happening in the sitcom is deeply tragic to the people who are actually involved in it. Hey, Lucy, will you introduce yourself? You are a longtime member of our Writers Bridge community. You have a brand new book out called How the Hell Did I Not Know That? You have an insanely successful Instagram. Tell us, how did you come to be writing comedy?
So I practiced law my whole career and then wanted to start writing once I quit doing that. And so I connected with Second City and went through their humor and satire writing program. And then from there started publishing a lot of short form humor on various humor sites. But Second City is really what kicked me off.
I love that. So what was the course you took at Second City? Like, what was it called and what did you do?
I think it's called satire writing, but it may be humor and satire writing. And there's a series of courses through their writing program. And so I think it was 3 or 4 courses. They were developed by Caitlin Kunkel. If you know Caitlin, huge humor writer, longtime humor writer. And then taught by various people. So it was really good. It also gave me a cohort of other humor and satire writers. And then we send each other draft, pieces, and, it just helps to have that writing group of people who are coming at it from comedic perspective.
I like that. I like that. Dinty, are you a lone writer or are you a shares work with other writers writer?
I've been in different things at different points. I realized I've been doing this for well over 30 years, writing fiction, short stories, and then more recently a lot more essay and memoir. And I've been in periods of my life where I'm getting constant feedback from other people, and periods of my life where I don't show anybody anything till I think it's done. If you don't throw me off this talk today, what people will learn is that, there's no, in my world, there's no one right way. You find what you need at that point in your career. And the only difference is you have to ask yourself, is this working for me right now? Because sometimes what worked for you 10 years ago is the thing that's blocking you right now.
Oh, I really like that. And I think that is so absolutely true. Now, I do have an update on our guest, Elliott Kalan, former head writer for The Daily Show and currently the showrunner for the reboot of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Elliott believed that we were meeting at 1 p.m. Pacific time. He's in a meeting and he's going to get here as soon as he can, which is probably going to be in about 45 minutes. But we're going to keep talking about writing comedy until we get our special guy. We have two other even more special people because they are here. Lucy.
That makes me feel very special.
I can go special however I can get it.
I am looking at both of you as if you are holding a life raft over your heads like this. You're kind of balancing it. So we're all going to take off our shoes before we get onto it. So I want to know what makes something funny. We have a lovely question from Jan in the chat. Her husband insisted long ago that she is not funny, but then he laughs often enough and says she is funny. How can you be funny on the page deliberately? Lucy, how are you funny on purpose?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question to answer because I'm naturally, like when I talk, I'm always sort of making jokes and quips. So it's kind of innate to me. But I think looking at something from a different perspective helps. So if everybody is gonna attack something one way, it's like, what does this remind me of? How is this similar? And then just sort of turning something on its head. I don't know if that's a good explanation, but
I think it's a good one.
Dinty, chime in.
Yeah, I agree with everything Lucy just said. You look for the odd angle at something. You think about something, especially if it's something everybody agrees on or is supposed to agree on, because religion tells us to agree, or society tells us to agree, or parents tell us to agree. You're always looking comics of all sorts, stand-ups. You can learn a lot from stand-ups or people who write comedy. It's like we're looking for that odd angle that nobody really talks about. Often it's not a polite angle. I will say that you have to be, I agree with Lucy on this, you have to be careful being funny on purpose because you don't want to be hitting the reader over the head. You want it to sneak up on them. So I will sneak 4 or 5 jokes for every one that survives. And so if it's a long piece, I've snuck hundreds of jokes in, hoping that 10 or 20 of them are still there by the time I'm done writing. Because if you get in the habit of saying something odd and weird or funny, then if you build that habit in yourself, then it'll start to slip out when you're not paying attention. And it's the ones that slip out when I'm not paying attention and surprise me. Oh, I didn't realize I just said that. I think I'll keep it. Those are the better ones rather than, I think Elliott Kalan, when he shows up, is going to say the opposite. He earns his living being funny on purpose. But for me, it's more of a step back and just let it happen through practice. Just keep practice saying something odd, practice saying something slant. Let it out whenever you want to, knowing you can and probably will erase it because it's stupid. And every once in a while, something will slip out and you'll go, ooh, I like that. I'm keeping that.
What do you think the difference between comedy and humor might be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I don't know. I don't know what the difference is. They're words and people have definitions. There is the more subtle, it sneaks up on you kind of humor, and there is the in-your-face comedy. I'm talking about the more subtle sneaks up on you humor.
Mm-hmm. I think comedy might be more of a formula. Yeah.
I wonder if humor is more arising from the situation and comedy is more creating the situation from which humor arises.
Good.
Lucy, what do you think? How do you make it funny? Do you set out on purpose and go, I'm going to make this funny?
I do think you have to be careful. I agree with Dinty that you can't hit people over the head with it, and that really sometimes you have to pull back But I don't worry about that on first draft. So I have far too many jokes in my first draft. And honestly, that just gets tiresome if it's joke after joke after joke. And it's also tiresome if you don't have a point to what you're writing. You know, if you're just trying to be funny, and it's like, but what are you trying to say? And so, really keeping in mind that there has to be a premise or a meaning or something that's bigger than just a bum, you know. So, uh, you know, I write a lot of jokes in there, and then I go back and edit most of them out and just leave a few punches in there, you know.
Which I think kind of brings me to this idea of, are there different types of comedy that work in different venues? Have you written for different environments? Do you primarily write in one voice? I have coached a number of writers to get published in the Belladonna, to get published in McSweeney's, to get published in the New Yorker Shouts and Murmurs. And each of those venues has a very different comic voice. Like if you're writing for McSweeney's, 9 times out of 10, if a writer sends me something and says, I'm trying to get this into McSweeney's, I can't get into McSweeney's. And I'm like, oh, because you need to be meaner. You need to be a little bit bitter. And you need to have a very specific person who is telling us this for a very specific reason. Whereas if you're writing for the New Yorker, you need much more of, it's a warmer, it's a softer angle of comedy. It's much more about, here's some things that smart people think are really funny. And when you laugh at it, you feel like you're one of the smart people too. Dinty, do you write in different voices? Do you have one voice? How does your humor come out?
I think I have one voice. I don't do the snarky or mean. I've thought about McSweeney's. I've started a few pieces and realized very soon into it that no, that's not me. And the only way I can pull it off is to totally fake it, and it didn't feel right. So I have that sort of softer, gentler comic voice. I mean, I laugh at myself as much as I laugh at the world, which is also a comedy technique that you will see stand-ups do as well. It's like you don't want to be making fun of people just to be mean, McSweeney's aside. You don't want to be just finding the rest of the world absurd as if you're somehow superior. You need to see, Sedaris does this brilliantly. All of the comedy writers are coming to mind right now. Sarah Silverman does it. You're laughing at yourself too.
Yeah, you don't want to punch down either.
Yeah.
That's a big comedy faux pas.
I love this idea of, we get to punch across and we get to punch up, but we can't punch down. Dinty, I'm going to turn this on to you as a white male of a certain generation. Do
Really?
you find that there's stuff, because I was watching a movie last night, actually, with my husband. It's called Shallow Hal. It stars Jack Black and Gwyneth Paltrow. It's about a man who starts seeing people for how they're beautiful on the inside, because, of course, people who are, different looks on the outside could not possibly be beautiful. And it's a movie that I don't think you could make today, because the humor is so dated and we have a much different consciousness about the world. Have you found, Dinty, that your way of writing has had to shift at all? Are there jokes you made 20, 30 years ago that you wouldn't make now?
Well, first of all, I agree with your premise that the world has changed so much for the better, for the most part. And we don't make jokes about certain groups because they're instant laughs. I mean, I grew up, frankly, when you made ethnic jokes about, I'm not even going to name the ethnicities, fill in the blank, but people whose ancestors came from this European country or that European country were instantly funny because they came from that country. That was just mean and stupid. We don't do that anymore. I haven't had to change that much because I've always, I hope I've always been very careful. I've tried to write my comedy from a place of empathy and compassion. And I'm not a best-selling comic writer either. I think if I was a little more bold and brave and brazen, and good at it, I'd have a bigger audience. It's a sort of a gentle comedy that I write, or gentle humor, actually, to use the distinctions that Sharla helped point out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking back, and those of us who grew up Generation X, there was a whole series of books called Truly Tasteless Jokes. They were meant to be books that you read in the bathroom, and they were basically joke after joke that were anti-woman, racist, sexist, chauvinist, anti-Polish, anti-Irish, anti just about everything you can think of. And actually, I heard a really interesting podcast that was talking about the development of those books and how they came to be. I don't think you could publish them now. Yeah, as Brian points out in the chat, they were pretty ableist too. Lucy, has your humor evolved?
Absolutely. So I used to write at the beginning almost exclusively satire. And just if it helps, the difference between satire and humor, satire is when you're attacking an institution or a belief system. And so you're punching up at those institutions or belief. Humor is just humor. And so I used to write a lot about political. So I live in Texas, so I feel like a real need to push back politically, religiously, and in a lot of different ways. And so I did that through satire. Honestly, I just got weary after I just felt like I was fighting, and I just got tired. So then I started writing more humor, sort of first person narratives, essays with funny things in them, a book that was, a humorous memoir. So I kind of got away from attacking as much as I was doing at the beginning. My last name is Frost, F-R-O-S-T, Cheryl. I just saw that.
Thanks, Lucy. And do drop your links to your books into the chat as well, and Dinty also. So let me ask you both, when you are looking at writing humor, what's the process of evolution in terms of going from a draft at the beginning to a draft that is a little bit funnier to a draft that is a little bit funnier? Now, many of you know I spent years as a street performer. And one of the interesting things about being a street performer is that you get immediate feedback on every single joke you make. Because if it's funny, they lean forward. And if it's not funny, they leave. And so every day I was trying out a script, trying new material, going, oh, if I use Kalamazoo instead of Walla Walla, the joke is funnier. If I use pumpkin instead of apple, the joke is funnier. I firmly believe that P's, K's, and J's make things funnier. Pickle, jackpot, it's already funny. And how much of your creation there is thinking of the situation and how much of it is polishing the language?
For me, I'll step in. For me, almost all of it is polishing, right? So I write a first draft. It's awful. I go back, I rework it, I tinker with it. I very often read them aloud because I like to write in a very conversational tone. And whenever I stumble over words, then I know that's not going to sound right to the ear. And honestly, the most important thing I can do is share my draft with somebody else who writes humor and have them tell me what's working and what's not working. I very often share with my youngest son because he's so funny and he has a good eye for, especially sometimes I honestly don't even, I'm not as in touch socially as I think I should be generationally. Like he can tell when something's offensive better than I can. And I really try not to hurt anybody, but I think sometimes we're not as aware of things that can cross the line. So anyway.
Children are
Dinty,
great at that.
Yeah.
Dinty, what's your draft evolution like?
To bounce, you could just bounce me off if you want. Everything Lucy is saying is what I would have said, and she says it even better. But just to agree, yes, I start with that idea of an impulse. I throw a bunch of jokes in, hoping a good joke happens. When it doesn't, I get rid of them, and then I keep a few. And then, yes, it's saying them out loud over and over again, moving that sentence around, writing that sentence, comic timing. Okay, so I just hit on something funny. How do I make it really work best on the page? So there's a lot of rewriting involved and a lot of saying it out loud because I trust my ears when it comes to what's funny more than my intellect. So yeah, I hope to hit something funny, and when I do, I'm not done. I start thinking about why is that funny and what can I do to that sentence so the punchline drops at the exact right moment.
I noticed somebody in the chat was asking where to publish humor writing. I just included in the chat a link of an article Julie Vick wrote about places to submit. There's several others of those. If you will just Google where to submit short form humor, but the big ones are the Belladonna, McSweeney's, Points and Case, of course, Shouts and Murmurs, which is a New Yorker. Shouts and Murmurs is tricky because you submit and then it takes about 6 months for them to get back to you.
And I would say too, with Shouts and Murmurs, it's much easier to get into Daily Shouts first and get the editor used to working with you. And then he's very often able to go, oh yeah, we like your work. We'll take something for Shouts and Murmurs. I've worked with a couple of authors who got into Daily Shouts first, and then they got into Shouts and Murmurs.
So you just have to submit an evergreen piece then, because you don't know when it's going to run. So you write one for New Yorkers, send it off, wait the 6 months for them to get back to you. They always give you a yes or a no, which is nice because a lot of places don't. McSweeney's has a very quick turnaround time.
Yeah, McSweeney's, they respond to you in like 24 hours sometimes, yes, 48 hours. He's so fast.
Quick. And if you tell them it's a topical piece, if it's like tied, it has a news peg, then there's a way that you signal that. He says that, and it explains it in the instructions. And you can signal that and he'll get back to you lightning fast so that you have time to get it somewhere else. One of the other things I neglected to say when you asked how to perfect your humor writing, the other thing when I was submitting a lot of short form humor, if I would get a rejection, I would always know where I was going to submit next. So I would be like, I'm going to submit this to this publication. If it doesn't work for them, I'm going to go here. And before I submitted, every time I always knew what the next one was. But you get several rejections and you know something's wrong with the piece, right? It's just not landing for whatever reason. So then that gave me information. And sometimes those editors are, take the time to tell you what's not working for them. And that's, of course, amazing. But, that's great feedback.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and when I was street performing, the feedback that we got was, oh, we were funny. Therefore, when we passed the hat, people put money in it and we got to eat. Yeah. And it makes you get a lot funnier, a lot faster when you're working in that kind of high stakes environment. So we have another special guest with us, David Olson, who is the editor at the University of Chicago Press, who acquired Elliott Kalan's humorous book. Dinty, will you leave us with your top tip for comedians? And Lucy, I'm going to ask you for your top tip as well before we go over to David. Dinty, what should we remember most as we move into writing humor?
Oddly enough, I think honesty. The humor that really affects people and stays with people isn't a flip one-liner. It's an honest approach to what you think is funny about the world.
I love that. Lucy, how about you? What's your top tip?
Oh, that's great too. I keep a running list. So when I'm out and about in life and I see things that are just quirky or odd, I keep a list of them. And then that gives me ideas for down the road, obviously. So just observational humor to me is really funny. And so just always be observing.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for joining and helping us out.
Really appreciate that. Now, our guest who is going to turn up in a little bit is Elliott Kalan, who is the former head writer for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and the showrunner for the reboot of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Elliott has written a new book called Joke Farming, and he explains that it's easier to write jokes when you have a method. All jokes are built from the same elements: structure, premise, voice, tone, wording, audience, and you can add those elements to any genre. And in this book, Elliot analyzes examples from his own career and his experience in professional writers' rooms, as well as his experience in everyday life. We also have with us today David Olson, who is the editor at the University of Chicago Press, who worked with Elliot on his book. Welcome, David. Will you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am David Olson. I am an acquisitions editor at the University of Chicago Press, a publisher of monographs and trade books, and about as far from tasteless jokes as one could get, truly tasteless or otherwise. And in my capacity as an editor of writing guides, I try to acquire books that are applicable to people who are maybe operating outside of traditional structures of writing and traditional communities of writers. And I'd been a long fan of Elliott Kalan's podcast, which he co-hosts, The Flophouse, which is a bad movie podcast. I was a fan of his writing at The Daily Show, even though I didn't know he was the one writing it. And I've admired some of his other work as well in comic books and other media. And so as a result, I reached out to him on Twitter. Back when Twitter wasn't as toxic as it is today. I sent him a direct message. He didn't know me. And I said, hey, have you ever thought about writing a book about comedy? And he said, no, I have not thought about it, but I will do it anyway. And so the result we have here is Joke Farming, available now for the low price of $19.95, which we thought was a pretty funny price. And like any other book that we publish at a university press, the book had to be peer reviewed. So I had to go out and find people who were experts in comedy, who were willing to kind of approach this book while at the same time, understanding that not everybody's process is the same. Not everybody is going to write jokes the same way, which we just kind of realized in the conversation that preceded my jumping on here. And it went through the same kinds of kind of rigorous vetting that we would do for a specialist monograph on, say, anthropology or sociology. And we are thrilled with the results. One thing I wanted to note about Elliot's writing, and I've never written anything long form myself, the shorter, the better, is my methodology. But one thing that he did after kind of coming up with the table of contents, which we worked on, we kind of workshopped back and forth, he then proceeded to write 2 full drafts in outline. So basically he, started with a bullet point, added a bullet point under there, added 2 bullet points under there, added, 3 more. So by the time we were at the end of what would have been a paragraph, we had about, 2 words at the far right-hand margin, basically just kind of going down based on the way that based on his own writing process. And I was fascinated by this. I was also, infuriated because it was very difficult to read, but he knew it was going to work for him. And he really generously responded to feedback. He went through 2 full rounds of outlines. We went through 2 full rounds of revisions of the manuscript before we sent it out for peer review. And along the way, we had to kill a lot of darlings. It's something that he, kind of talks about, knowing when to throw away a joke, knowing when something's not working, knowing when to not continue working on a certain routine. And he lists a number of those in the book. I think he one of the honest things of the book is that he really wanted to start out as a comedian doing edgy comedy, and edgy comedy at the time had a lot of, kind of, it could be sexually explicit or at least sexually adventurous. And he realized that that wasn't going to work for him because nobody would take him seriously as a sexual being. And so he kind of had to abandon that plan and focus on what he knew and kind of writing from home. And, one of the things that he kind of written into one of those outlines just briefly was a passing reference to Abbott and Costello's Who's On First. And I encouraged him, like, no, you should lean into this. You should be the definitive person to say why Who's On First is so perennially funny. And he did, and it was very long. And I had to tell him to take it out, even though I had asked for it. And it was great. It was brilliant. It was very funny. It was just too long. We wanted a punchier book. We knew we wanted to get a specific word count. We wanted it to look and feel and read a certain way. And so there were a lot of those kind of heartbreaking moments along the way where something was just really funny, but at the same time, it's a writing guide, and we wanted people to be able to really benefit from the experience that he's bringing to the table.
When you contacted Elliot, Elliot already had a platform. He had been a TV writer for major network shows. He had podcasts. He had worked in children's books and comic books and adult writing, all kinds of things. If someone was to come to you with, let's say, another type of writing craft book or another humor book now, what kind of platform are you looking for a writer to write an expertise-based book like this one is?
I mean, it varies from project to project. There are some places where some books that I've acquired where the author is working in such a small niche discipline that it doesn't necessarily require a platform so much as it does a track record of that experience, because it's writing for people who are operating outside of traditional platform structures, and so a writer wouldn't necessarily need that if they're trying to reach communities of writers who may not necessarily be part of that mainstream ecosystem, who may be working at a kind of grassroots level, let's say. And so with the right approach to the material and the right enthusiasm, that I wouldn't say that's necessary. On the other hand, I've, for example, fielded a lot of books on screenwriting where the writer may have a very good approach, but at the same time, that approach is not, it doesn't necessarily, it resonates too closely with books that are already out there. So I feel like the kind of writing guide that people are looking for, or a guide really to any academic subject, is one that is, willing to take risks and come from a place of honesty. Somebody who is really kind of plying their craft in a way that strikes them as especially unique, but also especially expressible. There's a lot of ineffable things that go into writing. There's a lot of ineffable things that go into, the kinds of things for which we produce guides, things like fact checking, things like copy editing fiction even, we have a guide for. And so, there's a lot of intuition there, but also the willingness to kind of, express and be human about the process is something that I'm always looking for.
And, the thing that you're saying about people ending up being derivative of other books, it reminds me of when I was teaching theater, and I taught at the same festival 2 years in a row where I was coaching actors on mask and movement theater. And the second time around, one of the other directors said, I can really hear your voice now. Last year, I heard your teacher's voice. And when I think about what I know about writing drama, about writing comedy, about structure, I think, yeah, I learned about screenwriting from Sid Field. I learned about screenwriting from Robert McKee, legends in the field. I learned about writing from Anne Lamott. I learned about writing from Natalie, who is Thunder and Lightning. Natalie, Writing Down the Bones, Natalie Goldberg, thank you. And I had to get to a stage where I could evolve enough to have my own stuff to say, my own unique take. Now, David, I know that you do a lot of how-to kind of books, a lot of expertise and guidance books. What are you most excited about that you've got coming down the pipeline?
I'm really excited about a few projects, one of which is the process, or when I alluded earlier to someone who doesn't necessarily have a platform but has such a niche. It's a book on documentary theater, and it's kind of designed for telling individuals and group stories with, based on the oral histories of the people, of the subjects of these plays. And so it's a really fascinating project. It's really exciting. I kind of see this more for people who are working as activists, people who are working in the communities, kind of organizing and supporting, communities, particularly marginalized ones. That's a book I'm very excited about. I also have, and that's, kind of something that's in manuscript form right now. We're working on it. I also have a book coming out from the University of Chicago Press this spring. It's called Creativity or Chaos, Creativity Completion. New approaches to writing and ADHD. It's an edited collection that features a number of writers from across the board, who are very open about their diagnoses with ADHD and how it affected themselves, how it affected their creative lives. And the approaches are as different as the authors themselves. There are experimental pieces, there are straightforward narratives, there are visual collage essays, there are pieces that, break the fourth wall. There are some that probably even break the fifth wall, whatever that is. The authors really kind of jumped into this and found themselves offering both advice and strategies for writers who may have ADHD, but also thinking about the ways in which the ways in which how they express themselves is inextricably tied to things that have happened to them and the way in which their body, reacts to those things. It has a foreword by Rebecca Mackay, and it's edited by the poet Chloe Martinez and the novelist Lisa Van Orman Hadley. And it actually emerged as a result of a panel at an AWP conference that I attended.
That's fantastic. So AWP, another great place to get seen. I'm going to bring Dinty back, but David, stay with us. We have a great question from Jillian in the chat that I would love you both to answer as editors. Jillian asks, please tell me how not to write the most depressing essays ever. Now, Dinty, I know you see a lot of flash essays for brevity. David, I don't know if you've done an essay book, but I'm sure you've seen a fair number of manuscripts that have been deeply depressing. Dinty, you start us off. How do you take an essay, maybe it's about a sad subject, a traumatic subject, a deeply intense subject, and still bring in some humor?
Boy, that's a heck of a question. I mean, the way not to write the saddest book or essay or memoir ever is to be aware that people already know that death, the loss of a loved one, serious disease, debilitating disease, people already know that this is really hard, unpleasant, and draining on an individual. You, if you were the person writing this, Allison, have all of my sympathy. It's a horrible thing, but I don't, as a reader, as a person who's curious to learn new things about the world, I don't need to be reminded how hard it is. I don't need only to be reminded how hard it is. So whether you're writing about the death of the person you love the most in the world, whether you're writing about your own challenges, whether you're writing about how horrible your parents were when you were growing up. And I've read memoirs about horrible, horrible parenting. The point can't be, look how bad this is, feel sorry for me. That's why, and to get to the humor part, that's why you're always looking for some other way to look at it. Can I walk away from this book about death with a wider perspective on the many ways that death affects us? Can I walk away from this book about trauma and loss because of illness with a new perspective on how trauma and loss because of illness can affect me? And often that new perspective will include humor because, life is a mixture of all of that. I'll stop there.
David, what about you?
Yeah, so I have never performed comedy. I've never written comedy. I've never aspired to do so, but it's always been something that's been important to me, both as terms of entertainment, but also as a mindset. And I think that, as Dinty was saying, I think that the balance of humor and tragedy is, essential to telling stories that, again, aren't going to be depressive. I don't know how many people have seen the movie, Zach Cregger's new movie, Weapons, that came out a few months ago. It's a horror movie that is absolutely devastating in terms of its content and in terms of its scenes and its characters. And there are nevertheless just slapstick moments and just laugh out loud bits that really punctuate what's an otherwise dreary and oppressive, mise en scène. And so I think that, finding it, and again, it doesn't have to be a 50-50 balance. It doesn't even have to be, a 75-25. I think, though, that, being aware that there is humor, even in the hardest things, and tapping into that. And I think being willing to risk that is something, being willing to risk the vulnerability of making a joke about something that's, so dire to you is, I think that goes a long way.
Sounds like modulating tones is important. and probably in anything that you're writing.
Which brings us to a great question from Nancy in the chat. Is there a different approach for droll humor, amusing humor, witty humor? I would say maybe highbrow versus lowbrow. Dinty, do you take a different approach between highbrow and lowbrow humor, or do you see that in action?
Well, you have to know your audience. If you're writing for a New Yorker audience, it's very different. If you're writing for a university press audience, or for that matter, a literary audience, it's very different than if you're writing for some comedy magazines are, I grew up loving Mad Magazine. Mad Magazine probably is responsible for my aesthetic much more than Hemingway and Dickens, even though Hemingway and Dickens are the writers that made me want to write. So you have to know your audience, and you have to know where you're aiming your jokes. There's room in the world for all of this, but certainly in the literary world, I don't like the term highbrow, really. But there is a sophistication that humor can be sophisticated, and it can be very, very unsophisticated, and you just have to be aware and be deliberate.
I love that. David, I've got one more question for you. And thank you very much, Dinty. Thanks for jumping back in again. David, I've got one more question for you because and this is a little bit off track from comedy, and Jim Germanock, I'm going to call on you in just a minute. David, we all want to know, because we are all writers, what do we need to bring you if we want you to take a look at our book? What is important for you to know about us? Is it that you need a proposal and the proposal needs a great marketing section? Is it that you need it to fit a specific niche that you're looking for? Like what does a writer need to bring you to get you excited? David, you are still on mute. And Jim, that was a false alarm. Our guest has just arrived. And as soon as we hear David's answer, we're going to bring in our guest.
Okay, I have a relatively specific position at University Press, acquiring guides. And so really, I think it's the proposal and the strength of the overall idea is more what I'm looking for, and less so the marketing pitch and less so the network than it is the strength of the idea.
Fantastic. David, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and how you developed Elliott Kalan's brand new book with him. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our fantastic guest. Elliott Kalan is an Emmy, Peabody, and Writers Guild Award-winning television writer and producer. His credits include head writer for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, head writer for the reboot of Mystery Science Theater 3000, among many other shows. He is currently executive producer and showrunner for the forthcoming Ghostbusters animated series on Netflix. Pretty sure the internet is dying to know if this is the boy Ghostbusters or the girl Ghostbusters. Elliot hosts or co-hosts a number of different podcasts: Clueless, The Flophouse, The Power Broker, which is a limited series from 99% Invisible. He's done a children's comedy sketch, 3 children's picture books, and a comic book series for Marvel and DC. His new book, and we have dropped that link in the chat, and we will drop it again, is Joke Farming: How to Write Comedy and Other Nonsense. It's coming out November 12th from the University of Chicago Press, and you can pre-order it now. Everybody, welcome Elliot. Let's do the jazz hands.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Allison. I appreciate it. I apologize so much. I want to give a huge apology to everybody for being so late to this. This is entirely a time zone mix-up on my part that is inexcusable, but I'm going to ask you to excuse it, please. I'm in California, and I still think wherever I live is where everybody else is talking about all the time. And so I got the times mixed up. I was going to put on a nicer shirt. I was going to shave for everybody. And instead, I apologize. All those plans went out the window because of my inability to remember how maps or calendars or clocks work. So I apologize.
That's
Thank
okay,
you so much
Elliot.
for being here.
We are so glad to have you. Elliot, have you always been funny? Where did comedy start in your life?
Thank you so much for the implication that I am actually funny. I appreciate it. I guess so. That my mom tells me all the time. She says, hey, when you were a little baby, you would make faces that would make everybody laugh, and you were always telling funny things and saying funny things. And I think it's something that has always been somewhat internal to me, but at the same time, even from a young age, I was very drawn to it and very drawn to figuring out, how does it work? How do you do it? You know, I grew up, I feel like, in the golden age of stand-up comedy on television in the 1980s and early 90s, when it seemed like there was always stand-up comedy on television. There was a lot of sketch comedy still on television. And I would just kind of drink down as much as that as I could. And I was enabled by my grandmother in a lot of ways, who was very big on introducing me to the comedy that she liked, which was kind of like classic Hollywood comedies, British comedy, things like that. She herself was not a particularly funny person, but she liked comedy. And so she had introduced that stuff to me. So it's always been something that has felt very, you know, natural and instinctive to me. And when I meet someone who is not naturally attuned to humor in that way, it really throws me off. I get very surprised by it, and I don't always know how to handle a person like that. So, so I apologize if anyone here is like, I don't get it. No, thank you.
You've written a lot of TV, and I think many viewers don't think about the teamwork that goes into the writing process of the writing room. What is that like?
Every kind of any kind of writing that is not just for you, for your own work, for you to speak out loud, is collaborative in some way. It involves you collaborating either with the person you're writing for, the people that are paying you for the work that you're doing, or the people that you're working with as colleagues. And something that I really enjoy a lot is being in a television writer's room, especially, where it's a lot of, in the best cases, kind of free-floating conversation and jokes, and you have your goal that the story you're trying to tell or trying to figure out, or the place that you need to come up with a joke to put it in. And ideally that room is very comfortable, because you want people to feel open, sharing their ideas. And ideally it is a place where people are trying to entertain each other. You know, you're trying to figure out the way to tell the story that will most entertain the people you're working with, or you want to come up with a joke that's going to make them laugh the most, or they're going to tell the joke that makes you laugh the most. And it's when it works well and everybody is on the same wavelength, on the same page, it's a really beautiful, really fun, organic process. When it doesn't work well is when there's one or two people who are less interested in collaborating and more interested in dominating. And that's something that is never fun at all. But when it works best, it's almost like what improv comedians talk about, where they talk about getting on stage as a group and nobody has any idea what they're going to do. And together they each contribute the ideas that they're coming up with in a way that creates a world around them, creates characters for them to be, and creates jokes. And they talk about group mind, or what they call the third mind, where it's almost like you've come together to create this larger brain that is thinking things that none of you would have been able to think on your own. But now that you're together, ideas are generating that are more fun or more exciting, or jokes that are funnier. It's a really exciting experience. The opposite of that is when the group mind is not working out well and you just have a room of people staring into space, no one coming up with any ideas. And then that's when you do a lot of like eating snacks that you shouldn't, and everyone's checking their phones. And that's the point when you want to say, as the person running the room, you go, let's take a 5-minute break. Everybody, let's take 5 minutes. But when it's working great, it's wonderfully cooperative. You know, everyone's thinking together.
I've experienced that flow as a performer myself. I have a history of performing in improv. I have a history of being a street performer. And very often when street performers are at a festival together, there's a group show where we all get together and do stuff together. And when it goes well, it is one of the most incredible feelings in the entire world. Like you walk out and you're like, wow, this must be what heroin is like, because it's amazing. You know, only I don't have to
And then you try to tell somebody else about it, and they're like, I don't understand. Like that's the problem, is anytime you try to describe the moment to somebody else, they're like, I don't get it. It's like, oh, well, you weren't there. You weren't there. Yeah.
You had to be there. You had to be there. Now, Elliot, you've written in a lot of media, TV, comic books, picture books, podcasts. And this kind of ties into a question from Yvonne in the chat, who wants to know how to write YA, young adult, with both humor and angst. So what elements of comedy writing are universal and what's genre specific?
That's a good question. It's a really good question. I wish my wife was here. She's a children's librarian. She knows all about YA books. She reads a lot of them. I think the thing that, so all jokes are made up of the same elements. And in the book joke forming, I talk about this, that they're all built on structure. They all involve the voice of the person telling the joke. The premise of what they're trying to communicate through that joke, the wording and the specific details of it, the tone that they're communicating with it, and then ultimately the effect that you want on the audience from it. And so jokes interact differently with different forms. A joke that's told in a sitcom might be different than a joke that's told in a movie, or a joke that you read in a prose novel, but they're all built on those same basic fundamental building blocks. And the most important thing I think you can do in something like a YA novel is to always be telling your jokes in a way that feels honest and accurate to the voice of the teller, whether that is the omniscient narrator, or if it's told in first person, if it's the voice of the character who's telling it. People often say very funny things in real life, but they're not saying it. They're not like, I'm going to tell a joke now, and then they tell it. And in a dramatic situation, often the best jokes are the ones that come out of a character reacting to a situation in a funny way, or a character trying to get at a goal in a funny way, where the character is not attempting to be funny, but the thing that they're doing is funny to you, the audience, either because of the results, or because you know something that they don't, or because it's so incredibly in character for them that you're like, that's them, or it's so out of character for them that it seems strange. And so I think the way that I would say to try to balance the jokes and the angst is to always keep it honest, and not try. If you think a really funny joke but it doesn't feel right coming out of that character, slot it away for another time for something else, because it's not worth breaking the reality of that character and their emotions and how they're feeling to get that hilarious joke out. And this is a temptation I have all the time. And I'm constantly going through scripts and being like, ugh, I gotta cut this one. Like, it doesn't really make sense for them to say, this character is about to be eaten by a monster. It does not make sense for them to be making this joke that they would have had to think about ahead of time. Something that happens a lot in the show I'm working on now is the balance of trying to figure out, when is a joke undercutting the emotion of a scene, and when is a joke enhancing the emotion of the scene? When is it expressing the emotion that you want the character to express? And so it's just the hard work of going through each moment by moment, saying, is this expressing the right emotion in this moment? Is this joke fighting the feeling that I want, or is it strengthening the feeling that I want? You know, and since you know the characters best and you know the story best, if you're writing the story, then you probably know it best until you show it to someone else and they go, this doesn't work. And then you have to figure out whether they're right or not.
Right. What makes an attempt at comedy not funny? Like, do you have any personal flops that you still remember that you're willing to
Yeah, I'm trying to think which ones I want to share. Sometimes it's a matter of a joke not being structured properly. If you're not, a joke is a way of delivering a certain amount of information so that the audience can then fill in the last little piece of information. The way I talk about it in the book is, it's like you want to say A, B, C, D, and then F, and you want the audience to understand E is the part that you're not saying, but they're going to get. You know, getting a joke is a matter of comprehending a joke, you know, in that millisecond. And if you don't give the audience all the information they need, or if you give them too much information, then you throw off that mechanism, that balance, and it makes it harder to get that joke. Those are the ones that I like, oh, well, you can always fix that. But sometimes it's just that the thing you're saying with the joke is not really an actual joke. In the book, I talk about trying to come up with, for years I wanted to write a sketch about a ventriloquist who could not talk. And the idea was this would be a sketch for the radio, and you'd hear the announcer announce it, and then you just hear silence, and then every now and then the clacking of the ventriloquist dummy, because he can't throw his voice because he doesn't have one. And then the audience reacting to it. And I could never quite find a way to actually make it funny. Like, it's a clever idea, but it's not really a funny thing to experience. And eventually I had to realize there's not really any actual joke there. It's just kind of like it's a clever conceit, but I hadn't figured out how to make it more than what it was on the surface. I hadn't figured out what is that extra piece of information that makes it a funny thing. And I think I finally figured it out. But then once I figured it out, I learned about Albert Brooks's ventriloquism routine that he used to do on variety shows in the 70s. And I was like, oh, well, he got it. He did a much better ventriloquism routine than I did. Like, that's, you know, where the joke there is just that he's a very bad ventriloquist. he's just doing it all very poorly, you know?
So does comedy come from the concept or from the execution? What's the balance?
A little bit of both. I think it needs to be structured properly. That's the execution. But it also ideally is saying something that is kind of making your brain go in a certain direction and then suddenly forcing your brain to go in another direction very quickly. And that's where a lot of the humor of it comes from. But there are ways to, there's a saying that like, that people say all the time, where they go, oh, it's funny because it's true, or it must be, he's just saying, being honest, and that's what's funny. And I don't agree with that. I think there's a lot of ways to make things that are not true very funny. And that's where execution comes in. There's a way to structure a joke so that someone will laugh at it because of the timing, because of the way the information is released, and then afterwards have them be like, wait, but I don't agree with that. Wait a minute, I don't actually think that's funny, but the joke tricked me to think it's funny. And so I think if you want a sustained enjoyment in the audience, it's a little bit of both. You have to be reflecting something that the audience recognizes as reality, and then twisting that reality enough so that the audience is like, I understand what you're doing, and I think it's funny, but it has to be executed properly. There's an old story about Bob Hope performing in England, and that there was some joke that hinged on the word motel. Like motel was the important word in the joke, in the punchline.
Oh, my husband is British. I know where this is going.
Oh, it's this. You know the story already. Where
No, but they don't know the story. You got to tell us all.
Where the audience would laugh at it, and someone was like, "Do you know what a motel is?" An American asked, and they're like, "No," but we knew the way he said it that was the end of the joke, so we knew that was the funny part of the joke. And that's the power of kind of structure and execution. Is you can get someone to laugh at something even if they don't fully understand it. But a better laugh is when they're with you the whole way. I worked on the show Mystery Science Theater 3000, which was one of my favorite shows growing up. And that show just throws, several hundred jokes at you per episode. And a lot of them are references to things. And I would find myself laughing at jokes that were references I didn't understand. And then years later, I would stumble on the actual thing they were referencing. And I'd be like, that's what it is. Now, the joke I laughed at 11 years ago, I finally understand what it was actually about.
And I love that about comedy, because I feel like good comedy makes us understand larger cultural moments that we don't necessarily know, but we kind of get it from context. Mm-hmm. We had a great question in the chat from Andromeda, that writing humor equals taking risks on the page, which one of our earlier speakers, Dinty, talked about, and then getting rid of what doesn't work. You talked a little bit about judging which part works. For writers who are working on finding their comic voice, how can we practice that? How can we test it if we don't have a room full of great colleagues?
That's a really good question. I think
now I'm presuming here that all your colleagues were great.
Most of them. I'm not gonna name them. I mean, working in comedy, people are sometimes greatly talented, but not great people. Like not necessarily people you want to be around. And sometimes they're great people, but they're not great writers, and many times they're both. I've been lucky enough to work with some really amazing people that I learned a lot from, and who I think learned from me. But but I think there's a thing that I say a lot to people who ask me advice about getting into stand-up, especially, but comedy in general, which is the only way to do it is to do it. And I think that the only way to figure out what's funny to you, and then to figure out how to make that fun to other people, is to try it. You can't kind of plan your way into it or study your way into it. You just have to keep trying and trying. And writing is just like that. You have to keep doing it over and over again to hone what you're doing. And finding an audience that you trust, even if it is your spouse, a friend of yours, a family member, someone who you not trust to not reject you as a person, even if they reject your work, so that you can be vulnerable in front of them with your work without worrying that they're going to hurt your feelings, or something like that, is the most important thing. Because there are definitely times when I've written something and I think it's really funny, and I show it to my wife or to one of a few friends of mine who are like my go-to readers, or this book, Joke Farming, the people that I sent it to, who are colleagues of mine, to give me their thoughts on it. And I know that even if they understand me, they know what I'm trying to do. If I say something that is phrased the wrong way, in a way that could be hurtful or insulting or offensive, they know that's not my intention. And so they can tell me without judging me. And they can also tell me if something's funny without judging me. I think it's all, that's very useful, because the final stage in any piece of writing is to give it to an audience. Like, why, if you're not going to share it with somebody, why do it? The whole exciting thing about writing is to take something from inside of you and share it with somebody else, so now they have it as a part of them also, and to make that connection. And you can't fake that part of the process. I will say, though, that having said that, I mentioned in the book, there's one audience which is the most important audience for you to satisfy, which is yourself as a comedy writer. If you think a joke is funny, it's possible nobody else thinks that joke is funny, in which case you have to throw it away, no matter how much you like it. But if you don't think it's funny, why are you even doing it? Why are you bothering sharing it with anybody? If you've made yourself laugh, if you've enjoyed the writing of that joke or the production of it, then you've accomplished something, you know? And at the very least, that's the first audience that you need to satisfy is yourself, you know? And then you take it to somebody else and you may or may not satisfy them. But I think looking at it as, I'm gonna write this joke for me, I hope somebody else likes it. If they don't, I don't have to share it with anybody ever again, but I can still enjoy it in my private moments by myself.
So how much do you need to be aware of the dedicated audience? So as a former street performer, I worked with a lot of jugglers. A lot of people have been surprised in my life that I do not, in fact, know how to juggle. And it's because everyone did it. It was not worth learning as a skill because everybody else did it. But jugglers have what they call the mom test, which is where they learn something that, you know, maybe it's a really crazy pattern. It's a Mills mess or something like that. And then they show it to their mom to see if mom is actually impressed by it, because there are a lot of tricks that impress other performers, but do not actually impress the audience because the audience can't follow what makes it hard or what makes it awesome. Does that translate to comedy as well? Is there stuff that only makes other comedians laugh?
Oh, very much so. And if you've ever been to a stand-up comedy club, you might see that often a comedian that is doing the worst on stage with the audience, you'll hear one or two laughs, and that will be the other comics in the back of the room laughing at those jokes, partly laughing that there's no response, but also laughing at those jokes. And there's definitely, you'll find in a writer's room, a joke will get pitched and everyone will laugh at it and will say like, that's kind of a comedy person joke, or like, that's an inside joke, where people, you know, that's too, either that's too meta or you will pitch a joke that you deliberately know is bad and everyone will laugh at it. And because once you've been doing comedy for a while, you start to like really appreciate bad jokes and bad humor. And there'll be for a moment, everyone will be like, well, we should put that in. And you'll be like, no. The only reason we laughed at that is because we're all too stuffed full of comedy that now we've gone around the other side. We like bad stuff. The same way that someone who you see TV shows where someone goes around the room, goes around the world trying out food from different countries, and the food gets stranger and stranger over time as the series goes on. Like that's what it's kind of like being a comedy writer. Your taste in comedy gets stranger and more esoteric over time, and you have to fight the urge to then make that everything you do, unless that's your voice and what you want to do, in which case you just have to be ready to have a limited audience. But there's a a lot of the times that you are writing for a specific audience, whether it's people of a specific age, if it's children, or if it is people in their 20s, or people in a specific group. I once wrote a number of times, I guess, wrote jokes for one of the Daily Show correspondents when they would speak at like conferences. So if they were speaking at like a conference of pharmacists or something like that, they'd hire me to write them some jokes that would be specifically for that audience, you know. And you want to know, at the very least, who is likely to be hearing this joke and what are they expecting from it? What do they want to get from it? And then how can I push what they want a little bit farther to surprise them, but not so far that it makes them uncomfortable. And so you want to have your audience in mind well, without letting it limit you completely. It's like you want to express what you think is funny in the way that they're also going to find it funny, or they're also going to enjoy it, because the audience wants the same thing out of this that you want out of it, which is for them to enjoy it. You know, the audience is, I think like there's a feeling sometimes when you're a writer or a performer that you're worried that the audience is like, all right, you know, prove it to me. And that they're really bitter. But when someone picks up a book, when somebody turns on a TV show, when they attend a public performance of some kind, they want to have a good time. Like they want to enjoy it. Nobody's going there being like, I hope this person fails. And knowing that has always been very helpful for me, because it means, okay, I just have to try to do this as best as I can. And the audience is going to meet me somewhat of the way because they want to have a good time. No one is like, I can't wait to see this thing be terrible, you know.
I love that. I love that sense of generosity for your audience, but also with yourself. And if you're assuming they're enjoying it, then you probably enjoy yourself as well. If a writer wants to break into TV comedy, what are their first steps? And do you have to move to LA?
The first step, I think, would be to say to yourself, do I need to be in TV comedy? Do I feel a compulsion to do it? Because it's a very hard world to get steady work in, and it's very hard to break into. You don't have to be in LA. You could be in New York, but there's less and less work in New York. But being in LA is much more helpful. It is very strange that we live in a world where communications technology is in everybody's hands, and you could in theory you could make a TV show anywhere or make a film anywhere, but the people who give out the money to do those things are still kind of centralized into 1 to 2 locations. But honestly, I think there is if it depends on where you are kind of in your life, where you are. If you have the time to do what I did, which is intern at a television show your last semester of college, and then work at that show for 13 years, and during that time kind of work up the ranks, that's a great way to do it. I would say my first advice is to start very young. Start as young as you can. If it's not too late for that, then the other thing I would say is to harness the fact that it has never been easier in the history of human civilization for someone to create something and then show it to the world. You know, it's the flip side of we live in this communication horror show where everyone sees what everyone else is thinking all the time and it makes everyone mad, is that it has never been easier to write something and then put it out into the world and have people see it. It's never been easier to record yourself saying something funny and then put it out in the world and have people see it. People may not see it still, or the wrong people may see it. That's the same risk you're going to run all the time. But I like to think of it as what's the risk that you're taking? And the risk that you're taking is, if I create this thing and I put it out in the world, best case scenario, someone sees it and they like it, and maybe this becomes a career. Worst case scenario, no one sees it and I've lost nothing but the time and the energy that I put into doing it. And so I think it's so much better. You know, when I went to school for screenwriting, and they had a very old-fashioned way of telling you how to build a career. They go, here's what you're going to do. You're going to put up an off-Broadway show, and you're going to invite agents and managers to that. They're going to come to that and they're going to ask to represent you. Then you're going to write spec scripts. Your agents are going to shepherd the spec scripts around town, and they're going to get you your jobs. And even by the time I was graduating, that didn't exist anymore. You know, it was just not the way things were done anymore. You no longer lived in the era when, you know, Swifty Lazar came to see your one-man show and was like, I like you, kid. And then suddenly you were writing for, you know, Sanford and Son or something like that. You know, so we're all in the family. The best thing to do is to just create and try to get out there and try to get people to see it, you know. And the thing that is most special to me of all the things that I do, even though I never would have thought this when I started, is this podcast I do about bad movies called The Flophouse that two of my friends started it 18 years ago. And they asked me to join a few months into when they were doing it. And that has now become, I think, probably my most lasting creative legacy in a lot of ways, is doing this really dumb podcast about bad movies. And it took us a long time to start making money off it. Now we make some money off it. It's enough to pay my mortgage. It's not enough to support my family all the time, but it's something that we own completely, and we can do whatever we want with it. We don't need anyone's permission. We can say whatever we want. If we think it's funny, we'll do it. And the freedom of that is so valuable to me and so wonderful. So I would say, find the thing that you can do like that is yours, that you control, that you own it, and create it and put it out there, and hopefully people respond to it. It may take time, and it may never happen, but still worth it.
I love that. I love that. Would you tell us a little bit more about how humor works? Like your comment about the audience filling in E when you go from, you know, A, B, C, D, F. How does humor actually work? Like what's the classic setup or structure for jokes or for skits, or for what makes it work underneath?
I'll try to say the quickest version of it, because there's a lot I could say about that. I could write a whole book about it. I did. Please buy it. But it's all about, as we're saying, kind of like information release. And the simplest version of that I'm sure we're all familiar with is setup punchline. You set up a joke, and then the punchline changes the way that people understand the setup. You know, so an example that I talk about in the book that I love. I'm a huge fan of the stand-up Rita Rudner. And who was, you know, she still performs, but she was an enormous stand-up in the 80s. And one of her early jokes was, I'm going to misquote it probably, but she says, I broke up with my boyfriend. He wanted to get married, and I didn't want him to. And like that, the
it's
punch,
the twist. It's the twist
twist
in the
at
tail.
the twist at the end. They're like, oh, he's marrying somebody else. When you said he wanted to get married, you meant you were the other woman in this relationship. And so she's telling you the setup is, I broke with my boyfriend. He wanted to get married. And then the punchline is, but I didn't want him to. And it changes. It's like your brain is going in one direction and that punchline just knocks it into this other direction. There's something, I think it's Steve Allen refers to it as something like changing the rules of the game that you thought you were playing. There's a joke that that's a little more, that's slightly more raw, that a stand-up called Michelle Buteau tells, where she says, "This has been a big year for me because all my male friends came out as predators." And then she continues to talk about that. And it's a similar thing where the punchline has changed what you thought the setup means. I like to think of jokes in terms of a 3-act structure. There's a beginning that sets up, there's a middle that continues a pattern, and then there's a third act that either enhances that pattern to an extreme degree or that distorts that pattern, because that's the other aspect of kind of joke structure. Setup punchline is the simplest, but what you're really doing is setting up a pattern and then disrupting that pattern in a way that surprises
and I've
people.
heard this as there's the rule of 3, which we all know: set up, punch, set up, punch, which for the record works for tragedy as well as it works for comedy.
Yeah.
But I would also say, and then the other one that I learned is we called it the rule of 52, which is if you just hammer the joke into the ground and keep coming back and back and back and back and back, eventually it gets funny again. There was a great article in the New York Times today about how Wallace Shawn's entire career has now revolved around the word inconceivable, because he just says it over and over and over again in The Princess Bride. What other like structures or moments do you see? I mean, do you all sit around and tell the aristocrats joke to each other?
That's one, I have to admit, that's like an earlier generation one, the aristocrats. I wasn't familiar with that joke until the movie of it came out, and they're like, everyone tells this joke, everybody knows it. I'm like, I guess that's like a,
it's a grandfather age comedian.
That's a greatest generation type of joke, I guess, you know. Whereas I'm trying to think, what is the one that everyone does now? Now it'd be more like memes that go around. You know, there's ones that everyone knows. But like you said, the rule of 3s, that's one I talk about in the book. It's like the rule of 3, the number 3 gets too much credit for being a special number. And it's really just that you are setting up a pattern, reinforcing the pattern, disrupting the pattern. And you can do that 3 times. You could do it. I like 5s. 5 times works for me, where there's 4 items and then the 5th. And that's the one where an example I give in the book is that there's a line from the play, The Search for Intelligent Life in the Universe, where she says, it's something that I know olive oil is made out of olives and peanut oil is made out of peanuts. What's baby oil made out of? And that's a rule of 3. So you have 2 things that are oil where it's made out of the thing, and then a third thing where that's not what they make baby oil out of. But but you're setting up that pattern and then disrupting it. But you can do it any number of times that feels right rhythmically. And you're right with the rule of 52s, where if you do something enough times, then it starts to be funny because you don't want to hear it anymore, and you don't expect it to keep going, but then you do expect it to keep going, but then you don't expect it to keep going that much farther. And I'm a big fan of hammering something into the ground 50 times so that the last time it's funny. And I'm willing to go through the 50 times of people getting very mad at hearing the same thing over and over again. But it all basically comes down to, like you'll hear, it all comes down to patterns and providing information, and also taking as little time as possible. You hear people talk about like comedy K sounds. Words with Ks in them are funnier than other words. That's a real Borscht Belty thing to talk about.
I mentioned that earlier, actually. J's, P's, and K's.
And what I think it is I think it's because those are such hard sounds, I think you just take them in faster. And so you want to get someone to the idea that you are hoping they jump to quickly, rather than taking a lot of time.
If I end the joke with, and then I yelled bingo, it is slightly less funny than if I end it with, and then I yelled jackpot, because it's got that crispness at the end to it.
Yeah, you just pick it up faster. And so patterns, speed, there's a thing called heightening, which is where you want, if it's 3 examples of things, you want them to kind of like heighten in either intensity or in disgustingness or in scale or whatever the rubric is that these examples are going by for the joke. You want them to get bigger with each one or smaller with each one, in a way that you're taking the audience on a journey from one to another, where there's kind of like a dynamic to it. I'm describing this one very poorly. But it's a
Well,
but
and I think there's a good example. Sarah mentions in the chat, Sarah's a stand-up, and she mentions it's like a catchy song. You have repetitions, you have a chorus that repeats, you have a rhythm that resonates, and then somewhere about 3/4 of the way through, we get to the bridge and it's a whole new surprise.
yes, it's like if you were almost like you were cutting straight to the bridge. Because in music, so much of it is about starting a pattern and then fulfilling that pattern in a way that gets you into the groove of that pattern. You know, that you're kind of there's something that it always bothers me when I listen to music, but it shouldn't, because the way songs work, where it's like if you hear it go da da da, you know it's going to do that probably 3 more times, and you're waiting for the 4th time it does it, and you're like, all right, it has to do that to complete the phrase, and now we'll go on to the next part. But in a joke, you don't want to get into that groove where you're always repeating and completing the phrase. You want to go straight from like the verse to the bridge, so that the audience is thrown off a little bit, you know.
Yeah,
that's a good,
I love
hadn't
that.
thought about it that way. That's a good way to think about it, the music way.
So we are a room full of writers, if not necessarily a writer's room. And we've got one more question before we kind of move into our final moment here. Well, 2 more questions, actually. One of them is, and it came from both Jillian and Mubina, how does comic structure translate on the written page when you're writing for a stand-up or a spoken thing? Like, obviously, you know, you worked with Jon Stewart enough to know that he's going to bring that deadpan stare in some of the time. Is it the punctuation? Is it just knowing who you're writing for? How do you make it funny on the page to become funny out loud?
That's a great question. And it's a combination of knowing the voice that you're writing for really well, so that you can write in their rhythms and in their wording. So often when I was writing for Jon, I would write a joke and then I'd go back and see how I could adjust it to fit his voice more. I would take words out that he wouldn't need, or I would try, there were phrases that he would use that I would write down just throughout the day, and then I would use them when I was writing to just keep it so it sounds like him. And that way, ideally, when someone is reading it on the page, if they know that voice, they're reading it with that voice in their head, and they can provide the rhythm and the tone that is going to go there, the emphasis and the performance. But some of it is also using things like punctuation, spacing on the page. So much of joke writing is about controlling the pace and the rhythm of how the pieces of the joke are delivered to the audience. And a way you can do that on the page is by the way you handle punctuation and spacing. And if there's a long sentence without a lot of punctuation, people are going to read through faster, in my experience. A bunch of short sentences with a lot of periods, people are going to, each period kind of stops you for a moment. And so you can control someone's momentum as they're reading through, and the way you space out on a page. This is something that you see a lot in what I would call online prose humor, which is like Twitter stuff and things like that, where instead of just writing it straight through as sentences, they will organize something in lists, or you'll have a line and then a big space and then another line. And all of those things allow you to control the audience's, the reader's intake of the information and the words, so that hopefully they'll pick up on the rhythm that you want to provide for it and the tone you want to provide for it. But the first step for any joke for me is always, who's telling this joke and what is their voice? What's their frame of reference? How do they express themselves? What's their perspective? Where are they coming from? What things are they likely to talk about or not likely to talk about? And if it's a famous voice, then it's great because you have something that you can work off of. When I wrote a Spider-Man series for Marvel years ago, and I've been reading Spider-Man comics since I was a child. So it was like, great, I know exactly how this guy talks. I know how he thinks. I know what he wants to do. And it was very similar to writing for Jon Stewart in that way, where it was like, I've studied this person. I know how they talk. I know their voice. And that made it that much easier to write jokes for them and to write it in a way where when you read it, it sounds right for them. It feels right for them because it fits the voice that you're used to hearing from them.
Yeah, I love that. I started as a playwright, and one of the challenges as a playwright is how do you write the dialogue in a way that covers the adverbs so that you're not having to put angrily in parentheses, in front of the line. You want the line to naturally flow in that particular way.
Of
Elliot,
course, what I've learned from working in television is that you can never guarantee it. So there's always a way to misread a line and misunderstand what the intention is. So yeah, you've just got to do your best to try to, like you're saying, write it so that you don't need to put angrily or like they so and so shouted embarrassed or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Too many adverbs. So, Elliot, we are coming near the end of our time, and we want to answer one more question before we wrap up. But we do want to let everybody know we are so glad you're here. Our next episode of the Writer's Bridge, we will be bringing back Lucy Frost, who you heard from a little bit tonight, who is also a wonderful humor writer. I say tonight because I'm in Portugal, so hello from the future. Lucy's going to tell us how she went from 0 to 100,000 followers and a book deal in midlife. There was no twerking on TikTok required. We also want to remind you we have Craft Talks webinars coming up. I'm going to be co-teaching a piece on building your author brand, setting up yourself as an expert who gets attention for your subject and then eventually, hopefully, leverages that into a book deal. That's going to be coming up on Craft Talks. And we also have a great, wonderful literary webinar coming up about writing hermit crab essays. I have also dropped into the chat, and I'll drop it again, my free email series that's coming up, which is just to prep you for getting finished with your book in 2026. So, Elliot, we had one more great question in the chat, which was, how do you get to be funny on a regular basis? Someone was saying that, people say they're funny when they talk, but they're not necessarily able to be funny on command. I'd like to know how you have gotten to be funny on command, and then I would like to play a short game with you that is a good practice for all of us being funny on command.
Uh-oh, now I'm worried about that.
You're going to yes and me on it, Elliot? Do I get a
yes,
yes
yes,
and?
I will. Yes, I will. Yeah, we'll do it. Yes. First, I want to say thank you so much again for everybody for being here and for tuning in, and my apologies again for being so late. The being funny on command is the hardest thing about being a professional comedy writer, is not being able to just wait for inspiration to strike, not being able to take your time and do something else while you think about what you're doing. And so while I was working at The Daily Show and I had very little time to write jokes, when I was a staff writer, sometimes I would have, if I had 2 hours to write a script, it would be great. When I was the head writer there, sometimes I would have about 45, 50 minutes to rewrite a script. And it was just not a lot of time. And so what I did was, and this is a big aspect of my book, Joke Farming, on store shelves soon, is coming up with a kind of regular creative methodology that I could use, which I call joke farming, where I had a series of steps that were meant to simulate the times when my mind kind of comes up with a joke really quickly. Kind of saying, I said to myself, what steps must my unconscious mind be going through when I am coming up with a joke? And how do I do that consciously so that if I don't have any ideas, I can kind of generate ideas that way? And so I came up with this process where I think about, what is the need that I have for a joke right now? What am I trying to communicate with this joke? And so I'll just state it for myself very plainly in a sentence, not trying to be funny at all. And then it's thinking about, okay, now I know what I'm trying to say. What is the premise that I can use? What's the joke story that I can use to express this? And it's just, for me, it's a matter of trying out different forms, different formats of joke. Is this something that is best said through dialogue? Is it best said visually? Is it best said through a character talking to themselves, to a character saying the opposite of what they want to say to someone else to get it across clearly? And I'll just try out a few different things in kind of like my mental Rolodex of comedy forms. And once I've hit on one that I really like, I will then get into the execution of it. How do I structure it properly? How do I make sure that I'm releasing the information in a kind of 3-act way? That's just the way that I like to work with them. And how am I leaving out the last piece of information that I want to leave out? And it's a matter of, and then it's just a matter of fine tuning that and then trying it out. I'll read it out loud to make sure that the tone of it sounds right, that it's not coming off sounding right. And sometimes I'll try it on another person to see if they like it or not. I do that a lot with my wife. So I'll be like, what about this, while I'm working on something, and I'll say it to her. But the first most important part of it is, okay, I want to write a joke. What is a thing that I need to say in this moment, or that I want to say in this moment? And in coming up with premises for jokes and things to say, there are 2 things that Steve Martin says in his book, Born Standing Up, that I found really helpful, where he says, there are things in life that make me laugh. So how do I use those things in my work? And comedy is a reflection of what is going on, and there's always something going on. So there can always be something to write jokes about. And so often it is a matter of, okay, I don't know what to write about. Well, what's bothering me right now? Let me describe to myself why it bothers me. What's the thing about it that I think is not right? Okay, how do I express that in a way that will help someone else get that point without me just coming out and telling them? What's a way that I can lead them to that point? Okay, now how do I structure it? And so it was having this step-by-step process that I could go through, because there's sometimes when you hear something and you're just like, bam, and you say a funny thing and it's amazing and everyone's like, you're a genius. How did you come up with that? And you're like, well, you know, it just comes to me. But when you're a professional, you can't rely on that all the time. You know, when you've got an hour and a half or 2 hours to write something and they need it, you can't be like, oh, well, I just didn't have it today. Sorry. Yeah, just don't got
Nothing
it.
makes us creative like a deadline.
Exactly.
And I want to just close here with a fun little game that can help us all be funnier faster. And it is about being funny on a deadline, and it is about committing to the end of the joke before you know that you're going to get there. Elliot, you may or may not have played this game before. It's a common improv game. It's called 185. And basically, we are going to get a category, and we are going to repeatedly tell one-liner jokes that all follow the format 185 blanks walk into a bar. The bartender says, I'm sorry, we don't serve blanks here. The blanks say punchline. And what we'll do is we'll just kind of riff and see what we can come up with. Now, I got to tell you, people, these are not necessarily going to be good jokes, but the point is to tell the joke even with what your mouth is going, even when your brain doesn't know where it's going to get to. So, Sharla, can you give us a large category of nouns?
Pencils.
Pencils, 185 pencils walk into a bar. The bartender says, I'm sorry, we don't serve pencils here. And the pencils say, ooh, that's sharp. Elliot.
I'm gonna have to think of something real quick. The 185 pencils walk into a bar, and the bartender says, I'm sorry, we don't serve pencils. And the pencils say, well, this is the oldest joke in the book. The pencils say, that's okay, we'll have drinks.
Sharla, 185 pencils.
185 pencils walk into a bar. The bartender says, I'm sorry, I do not serve pencils here. And the pencils say, erasure much? I don't know.
Yeah. So the point is you just keep generating 185 pencils, 185 perverted pencils walk into a bar. And the bartender says, I'm sorry, we don't serve pencils here. And the perverted pencils say, we just came to rub one out.
Oh, dear.
Like I said, they're not good jokes. Elliot, one more from you.
Do they have to be perverted this time, or can they just be regular pencils?
Perverted. They can be regular
that's
pencils.
Great. Okay, that's great. 185 pencils walk into a bar. The bartender says, I'm sorry, I don't serve pencils here. And the pencils say, hold on. I'm trying to think of some pun on point. It's not coming to me though. I'll think of something else. This will be the pencil. The pencil
say, what's the point?
Yeah, let's say, what's the point? The pencils
Exactly.
say, the pencils say, even here in Ticonderoga. Ticonderoga is a big brand of pencil.
Deep cut.
Yeah, that's for people who know the pencil business.
So those of us who are practicing being funny, I played this joke for years in live shows. I also play it by myself in the car, taking the categories off of billboards that I pass, because it is practice in thinking sideways. It is practice in letting your mouth start to write checks and seeing if your brain can cash them, because it makes you commit to the bit when you just start talking and trust that the idea is going to come. You are genuinely training your brain to come up with more humor faster. Elliot, leave us with your final words.
Oh no, I just want to say that the what you said about thinking sideways and is exactly so much about humor is finding connections between things that don't seem to have a connection between them, and that's where a lot of humor comes from, is forcing someone's brain to make a connection between two things that they didn't expect to have to connect, and that's part of the fun of it. And your brain going, like I didn't think that was going to happen. But my real last word is that I hope everyone had a good time listening. And again, I'll apologize again for being late. I'm sorry. You guys keep making me feel bad about it. You don't have to. But that even if to be a professional writer is wonderful. To be a professional comedy writer is wonderful. I feel very thankful and grateful that I've been supporting myself and my family on jokes for a long time now, which is not a thing that should happen. Like, it's not a thing that should be a job that you really can do that with. It doesn't make sense. But even if your life takes you in a place where you are not a professional writer, or you're not a professional joke writer, even if you're not getting paid for it, you are still a writer and you are still a joke writer. There is no department of writing that has to license you. You don't need permission from anybody. You don't need it to be a comedian or to be a funny person. You don't need to get paid for it at all. You just have to do it. And that's, to me, the most exciting thing about writing, is that all you need is the idea and the words, and that's it. You're doing it, and in a perfect world, in the most perfect world, you can then quit your day job and just do that. But even if not, there's no real natural biological distinction between a professional joke writer and just a person who is funny in their regular life. Either way, you are enjoying yourself, you're helping other people enjoy just being alive, and that's the most important thing. So to everyone here, I hope that even if you don't walk out tomorrow and get a job writing for, Kimmel or Colbert or something like that, that you can still think of yourselves as comedy writers. As long as you're making somebody laugh, that's the most important thing. There's a thing that I talk about in the book about every now and then I'll just tell a joke to my wife and she will not like it. And we were online at a brunch place in Hawaii. We were waiting online for a long time. And I said to her, it's a long wait, but it's worth it because they put real heroin in the pancakes. And she did not like that joke. She didn't like that I said it in front of our kids. She just didn't like it. But the excitement of telling a joke and of being a comedy writer is, you don't know. Maybe she would have found it hilarious. And the exciting moment is when you've told it, and there's that millisecond between when you've told it and when the audience reacts, and you're wondering, are they gonna like this? How are they gonna handle it? And that's, for me at least, like, that's the moment of the thrill. So as long as you're getting that thrill even from one person, then you're a comedy writer. Then you're doing it.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Let us all put our work into the world for that breathless moment of waiting to see how people will react. Everybody, thank you so much for Elliott Kalan being here. We're so glad to have you. Thank you to our extra guests. And folks, please unmute yourselves for a joyful Writer's Bridge goodbye. Please do unmute yourselves. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We'll see you again next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Very much.